Welcome to the Invite Health podcast, where our degreed healthcare professionals are excited to offer you the most important health and wellness information you need to make informed choices about your health. You can learn more about the products discussed in each of these episodes and all that Invite Health has to offer at www.invitehealth.com/podcast. First-time customers can use promo code podcast at checkout for an additional 15% off your first purchase. Let's get started.
By now, you've probably heard of the importance of omega-3 fatty acids, and I want to focus in particular on DHA, which is docosahexaenoic acid. So we'll just shorten it to DHA for simplicity's sake, but I want to really zero in on this fatty acid in particular, because when we're looking at our omega-3 fatty acids, DHA is very critical when we think about proper brain development, even in an infant, which is why you are starting to see infant formulas which actually are containing DHA, because we understand so much more now about those essential fatty acids and why we need them for not just our brain, but for the entire body. So I'm Amanda Williams, MD, MPH, and I really wanted to zero in on DHA, because many times when I'm talking about things like fish oil or krill oil, I combine the two. I look at both the EPA and the DHA, but the DHA in particular plays a very vital role in the structure and the function within the brain of not only children and developing infants, but when we look at the adult brain. And so this component of phospholipids is really very essential. And our exposure to DHA is usually not sufficient enough, which is why we are more prone to issues with cognitive decline as we get older. We always have to think about what it is that those omega-3 fatty acids are actually doing within the brain itself. So I want to talk about a study that was published in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease, where they were looking at the effect of DHA specifically, so taking away the EPA that we get from fish oil and from krill oil, and just focusing in on DHA and looking at that supplementation and how that actually could change the volume of the brain, at the same time really help to enhance cognitive function. So they set this study up, and this was a 12-month randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial. And they were looking at how it was that the DHA was playing a role in brain function, and that higher DHA intake was inversely correlated with that relative risk for developing Alzheimer's disease. So they were looking at all the potential benefits of just DHA supplementation alone. So taking the EPA out and just having just the DHA. They wanted to see, we know that this is this very important omega-3 fatty acid. We have to have it when we're, developing as a human being, but we also need it for maintaining the structure and function of the brain as we grow older. So this study was designed basically to determine the effect of DHA supplementation on cognitive function and hippocampal atrophy. So when we talk about the shrinkage of the brain. So the participants received either DHA, 2 grams per day, or they were receiving a placebo. And they were looking at global and specific subdomains of cognitive function, as well as measuring that hippocampal volume. So they measured it at baseline at 6 months in, and then again at the conclusion of the study, which was 1 year. And there were significant differences in terms of the hippocampal volume in the group that was given the DHA. And the findings suggested that DHA supplementation for that 12 months in folks who had mild cognitive impairment could significantly improve cognitive function and slow the progression of brain atrophy, specifically within that hippocampal area. Now, we also know that when looking at DHA, this has been shown to make leaps and bounds difference in people who have different mood disorders, from bipolar disorder to major depressive disorders. And the Department of Nutritional Sciences, through the School of Public Health at University of Michigan, they were actually looking at this. And they did this in conjunction with researchers out of the University of Texas Health Science Center. And they were looking at this association between the omega-3 fatty acids and for markers for inflammation in people who had bipolar disorder. And they wanted to assess, once again, if there was a correlation between low levels of omega-3 fatty acids, so the EPA and the DHA, and higher levels of inflammation found in the body. And indeed, that is exactly what they found. They found higher levels of things like interleukin 18, and they found higher levels of tumor necrosis factor alpha. And they also found that when they had higher EPA and DHA levels, those fatty acids that they can assess in the blood, these levels of inflammation came down. So we know that the omega-3 fatty acids really are playing this very substantial role when it comes to targeting inflammation, easing inflammation, and at the same time maintaining the structure and function of, most importantly, our brain. So understanding that hippocampal volume study and looking at how the DHA was making this significant difference in terms of cognitive function and ability, then we start to look at more and more of the science. And there was a really unique journal called the Prostaglandins Leukotriene Journal, where they were looking at DHA, specifically this long-chain polyunsaturated fatty acid, and how this was essential and fundamental when it came to the formation and the function within the nervous system, so particularly when we're thinking about the brain. But we also know DHA is very important when we think about our eye health and the retina in particular. So in this study, they wanted to look at the role of DHA in terms of human evolution and looking at that growth and development within the brain, and DHA being considered a critical nutrient throughout pregnancy as well as the early development of the infant brain. And understanding that this is something that doesn't just stop, at 3 years old, 4 years old. This is something that we need to carry throughout our lives, that importance of DHA when it comes to the neuroprotective properties that DHA yields us. Now, in the Journal of Nutrition, they were looking at how higher DHA levels in the blood were correlated with improved cognitive function. And we know that when we get older, a lot of things start to shift in the body. And if we're not getting in adequate omega-3 fatty acids from dietary intake and you're not supplementing with this, then you're going to start to see those negative impacts. We're going to see more chronic, low-grade inflammation. We're going to start to see the slow cognitive declining process that occurs. So in this study, the way that they were designed was to look at the effect of omega-3 fatty acids on cognitive function in people who were middle-aged. So these are people who didn't have cardiovascular disease. There was no underlying neurological or psychiatric disorders that were occurring. And they were looking to see if the omega-3 fatty acids, the EPA and the DHA, if this would have any impact in terms of their attention, concentration, general memory, their working memory, the ability to process new information. And sure enough, they found that there was this direct association, in particular when it came to DHA, and that higher levels of DHA were found in the groups that had higher test scores. So in all of those different areas of reasoning and mental functioning and that working memory, those who had the highest DHA serum blood levels had the best performance on all of these cognitive function tests. So we definitely know that DHA is essential. It's a very important and powerful omega-3 fatty acid, and it is something that when we get older, we should definitely be including into our daily supplementation routine. So whether you're doing DHA as a standalone product or you are supplementing with fish oil or krill oil, make sure that you are getting a good adequate amount of DHA on a regular basis. So that is all that I have for you for today. I want to thank you so much for tuning in to the Invite Health podcast. Remember, you can find all of our episodes for free wherever you listen to podcasts, or by visiting invitehealth.com/podcast. Now, do make sure that you subscribe and you leave us a review. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And we will see you next time for another episode of the Invite Health podcast.